Good morning to our friends on the West Coast and Central, and happy lunchtime to the East Coasters. I'm Christine Nicholas. I'm here, as always, with Jess Oberto, our Director of Process Engineering, and my good friend, Scott Shue.
Hey,
Did
hey.
you notice how I calmed my voice? Because just being in the presence of Scott tends to calm me down, even though I'm kind of hopped up on caffeine right now.
Well, thanks for having me. Good to be here. And hi, everybody.
So I'm so excited that Scott's on our webinar for this month. This is his book, The Full Body Yes, Looks Backwards, right? What a great book. And I had the opportunity, I only know about the book, of course, because I met Scott at the Modern Elder Academy in the Baja with his beautiful wife, Parna. Am I saying Aparna's name right?
Aparna, that's right.
Yeah.
Good job.
Just a fantastic power company in mindfulness, but also years of experience in the business world, which is exactly that intersection that we need right now. Mindfulness, how do we bring all these different headsets, some of them warring headsets, certainly the out of balance in our organizations. And before we started the webinar, we were talking about, we have these out of balance situations within most organizations now, right? Because it's always been, the power has always been greatly weighted towards the organization. And we saw that changing, right? Which, by the way, this correlates with the unemployment rate, well, lack of a better term, but really from the gap that we have between the type of talent that's available and the type of talent that organizations need. So then the pandemic hit and we see that gap, the power shift, employees gaining more power and gaining more power. And my view at this point, and we'll talk a little bit more about Elon, right, is that we're at, okay, I'm the employer, still the economy is ambiguous, but I can get some control. I can feel as though I have some control back by starting to say, I'm going to lay off. I can maybe not take this whole humanistic viewpoint on things and get back to business as usual. And I think at the same time, from my perspective, we need to be patient with organizations too. You cannot take this giant battleship and expect it to get on board with everything that employees need that quickly. Right? So hopefully, I still feel like we're going in the right direction. This week's been unique. We'll see how much traction goes there. But what are your thoughts about that right now,
Sure.
Scott? And how do you want to start off today?
Sure. Well, maybe let's talk about the history of work for a little bit, just to give this some perspective, right? Because, most of us have been working for whatever, somewhere between 1 and 40 years, probably. But if you go back to the history of work, it started in the really, really, really old days in the agrarian economy with kings and slaves or landowners and serfs, right? And so our leadership tendencies are rooted in thousands of years of absolute power. And so the management style was, I told you to do it, why didn't you do it yet? And there's severe consequences if you didn't. All the way for thousands of years up until like the industrial age. And still, you imagine a giant factory and workers are kind of replaceable. But now we're in the information age. And so there's this rocky, like trying to find our footing of what is stabilization. But in the information age, it's so clear that employees are the most valuable resource that a company has. And we've been talking about the war for talent and using this type of language because we know that the companies who get the best employees and keep the best employees over the long term are going to be the most successful. So yeah, there was probably some overcorrection on coddling employees or, giving them more than was necessary. And we're finding our balance. But here's the thing. There's some really interesting research by Raj Sisodia and the team that wrote the book Firms of Endearment and later Conscious Capitalism. And what they found was over the long term, companies or organizations who serve all of their stakeholders, not just their shareholders, are actually more profitable. What that means is if as a company, if you can create a balance, yes, for your shareholders, they're people too, they trusted you with their money, but also to your employees and provide value for your customers, and you do it in a balanced way and on purpose, they're 14 times, that's 1,400% more profitable than companies who are only focused on profit, which I think is kind of wild. And as a human, this makes sense because think about your primary relationship, whether it's your spouse or one of your kids or your mom or whoever. In your primary relationship, if you said, okay, there's two of us, for me to be happy, I'm going to get 100% of what I want 100% of the time. Yeah, right? Is that the actual recipe for happiness? No, that's the actual recipe for ending that relationship.
So if we take organizations and we shrink them down to a one-on-one relationship.
Yeah. When everybody wins, everybody wins. And so I think this is the balance that we're trying to get to. And it's when I talk about conscious business, this is what I'm talking about, is how do you create that balance in every moment, in every policy, in the way that we hire, in the way that we let go, all of those things lead us to better results in addition to being better people.
Wow. Scott for president. At least in my world, right? Or in our world, Jess, where our whole lives revolve around talent. You know, that's what we do here for many, many years. So it's really an exciting time to be in the people space, in the work people space. But when I've read books that quote the same things that you're talking about, but when you hear it out loud, I really appreciate you bringing it down to that one-on-one relationship.
Yeah.
So it's cool.
Yeah.
And you were with LinkedIn for how many years?
9. So the
9
first 6, I was, most of my career has been in customer facing roles. I was the VP of Global Customer Operations. So essentially customer service, but more than that, it was most of the stuff that is customer facing that wasn't hunting, that wasn't pure sales. And I was there from, my team started at a couple hundred people and grew to over 1,000 over the course of those 6 years. We were in incredible growth mode in LinkedIn. But I'm also a bit of a dual agent in that I've had a meditation or contemplation practice since I was 13. I've been teaching since I was in college. Outside of work, I'm a member of the clergy in my spiritual path. And none of those things I talked about at work, but I was finally able to bring all that, like bring my whole self to work at LinkedIn. And long story short, I started by leading meditation classes at work. I was the executive sponsor of our mindfulness program. We didn't really have one, so we created one. And over the course of a few years, eventually turned that into a full-time gig where I was the head of mindfulness and compassion programs at LinkedIn for the last 3 years that was there. And so it was pretty.
I didn't even know that was a title until I met you.
It wasn't. I created the role. There are very few of us out there.
So what did you do in that role? And what was the effect on the organization?
Yeah, that's a good question. So my vision today still and then is to change work from the inside out in 2 ways. So the mission is by mainstreaming mindfulness and operationalizing compassion. And so at LinkedIn, I was mostly focused on the mindfulness piece and think of mindfulness as an individual sport, right? As perhaps it kind of gets put in the wellness bucket in a company. And you can think of it as mental exercise, right? So what we did was we tried to make mindfulness or mental exercise just as normal and commonplace as physical exercise. So yes, we had meditation sessions and things like that, like 40, 50 a week across the globe. We gave people access to an app. We started with Headspace, but moved into one I like even better called Wise at Work from my friends at Wisdom Labs. Every year in October, we would do a 30-day challenge around that app to get, a company-wide, get everybody using it. We would give away a free t-shirt or a hoodie if people used it a certain amount for the month. And what I would say is never underestimate the power of a free hoodie on human behavior, because we had massive spikes during that month of people using the app. We would do speaker series. We would do weekend retreats or Friday afternoon retreats. And the other body of work was around operationalizing compassion. And LinkedIn is a very compassionate place. So part of my job, I felt, was to be like an investigative reporter to see how did we get here? If we were to take 5 or 6 of the best practices and try to put them in a box and put them somewhere else, what would those be? And so I was teaching workshops on things like building resilience, teaching workshops on things like compassion and action. Then you asked, what was the impact to the organization? Well, I'm a business guy too, right? And so I want to measure ROI. And ROI is tricky to get to for lots of things, right? Because there's so many factors involved. So I started by measuring essentially consumption and satisfaction. If I offer a program, did anybody come and did they like it? So that's easy to get to. And we were getting closer and closer to connecting the dots between, people who do mindfulness and productivity, but it's still a little hazy. The numbers and the math required are beyond, the scope and size of LinkedIn, to be honest. But what I like is the stories, because this is real. As an example, during COVID time, a young woman who is a salesperson reached out to me to thank me for the programs we were offering. And we were having a conversation. And she's one of these gals, super high performer, 2 little kids at home. And remember, in the beginning, there was no childcare. So she's doing it all, right? She's taking care of her kids. She's the primary cook and cleaner and taking care of the house, blah, blah, blah. She said, because of these programs, I'm screaming at my kids a lot less. And we laughed, but I knew that she was kidding and not kidding, right? Because we have all been there in our own flavor, our own context. She said, look, because we're doing this, I'm a better version of myself. I'm a way better mom. I'm a way better partner. I'm way better at work. I'm just a better version of myself. And I hear that story over and over for people. And I'm like, isn't that what we really want? Going back to the value for the company, we hire these amazing people. And then if they could be the absolute best version of themselves, if we as a company could provide an environment for them to absolutely thrive, what's the ROI on that? I think about sometimes physical exercise. Lots of companies have gyms. You get to a certain size, and then you'll have a gym on site. And, if somebody asks me, what's the ROI on these mindfulness programs? I'm like, okay, did you ask the head of the gym when you bought the new rower what the ROI on that rower was? Or did you ask the facilities guys when he, saved when he turned the air conditioning down in the summertime from 74 to 72, did we ask him what the ROI was on making that a more comfortable environment for the employees? And by the way, how many of our employees need to run a 6-minute mile for their job? Or they need to bench press, their weight? Or how many of our employees do we need to be mentally focused for their job or emotionally stable for their job? Oh, all of them, right? So I think we should be I love all the wellness programs, but we should be spending 50 times on mental wellness what we're spending on physical wellness.
Wow. When you put it in that context, it's an interesting way of looking at things. But really, if you weren't, let's say you could effectively, and I'm not sure you can effectively measure the ROI, it would be so much greater.
Oh, yeah.
When you have organizations that can actually function together.
Yeah. So you imagine a world where people leave all their mess at the door, or they've learned to deal with their mess in 50% better way. And we all have a mess, right? Whether we're going through family stuff at home, whether we're going through our own stuff at home, we all bring that trauma to work. And mindfulness is not the cure-all, but it's part of a spectrum of solutions for mental well-being. You have the hotline, the crisis hotline on the one end, which is like the emergency room, right? And you have other programs, workshops, and other things, which are kind of in between. And then mindfulness is like your daily maintenance. But what it does is it helps people stay in the green and yellow zone instead of getting into the red zone. Because for every problem in humanity, once we get into the red zone, we're in real trouble.
Hmm.
right? If you think of physical, if anybody's ever had to ride in an ambulance and then get the bill for that thing, you know, having a gym membership, whatever, costs you $500 or $1,000 a year. Taking one ride in an ambulance and getting a full CAT scan and all the stuff that happens when you're in crisis is tens of thousands of dollars. So the same thing with our mental well-being, right?
You would think that insurance companies knowing this would get further behind.
Totally.
And this is the movement. It's like this.
Yes.
They're going kicking and screaming. One more thing to pay for. But if they could look at that broad picture, and maybe some measurements would be great.
Interestingly enough, when I first got into this work 6 or 7 years ago, I got to meet the guy at Aetna who was the chief mindfulness officer at Aetna. And I thought, cool, because the Aetna CEO had had his own near-death experience. He was in a lot of pain, and mindfulness, saved him. It saved him from being in a lot of pain, saved him from the drugs that you have to take to get over pain. So they had a chief mindfulness officer. They were doing primary research. They were getting ready to roll out all these programs so that the companies they served could roll them out so everybody could be more well off and, save money. And then they got bought by CVS, and CVS wanted to save $300 million. And so that program disappeared. So we're making this is happening, this evolution is happening in fits and starts, where there'll be a little pocket and something great will happen. And then, leadership changes and whatnot, and we forget about it. But as a whole, this idea is still expanding.
And I hope this helps this audience start to be able to build their case too. Part of one of the things in the book that you brought up that really resonates with me, and I know that a lot of us with such a heavy focus on diversity, and having done a considerable amount of diversity learning and training myself, our amygdalas, right? And the rest of our brain, that backs up these unconscious thoughts, and one of the things that really prompted it as I was driving in this morning, having read much of your book last night, that really got me thinking is, how much of this false narrative from our amygdala do we even comprehend affects so much of what we do. And I think just learning about that has changed my life considerably. Yeah. The more we can introduce that at the C-suite level, so that, you can't understand your bias if you don't understand you have a bias. And you can't understand you have a bias because it's a bias. So, let's talk a little bit about.
Yeah, sure.
I think if I counted it, it's like 6,000 times. Maybe it comes up in your book. That's an exaggeration, but. So
I'll give you an example. So this past summer, my family and I got to go to Africa, got to go to Kenya, and we were on safari. And it was like the highlight. We've been planning this trip for over a decade, and we finally got to go. We were denied by 2020, and again in 20. We finally got to go. So we're out on the savannah, essentially, and you see life happen in its rawest form, right? You see animals chasing and eating each other. You see animals fighting for survival, trying to defend against each other. You see lions. So we saw pairs of mating lions. And sidebar, yes, this is relevant. 2 lions they'll leave the pride, and for 3 days, they will do their business every 15 minutes for 3 days.
That's impressive.
I didn't. Yeah. So now people have, a new spirit animal. It's the lion. But the reality is we are animals too. We like to forget this, right? We like to think that we're somehow different than all these animals. But everything those animals do and everything we do is about survival. It's always about survival. As a human, right now, dressed in the clothes we're wearing, our first reaction is a reaction that is evolutionary, and it's based on survival, right? You see an attractive person, and look, this is why we're obsessed with sex. We're obsessed with danger. It's why the news is what the news is, because when we look at the news, our amygdalas are firing. And what they're looking for, the inside of our brain, our fear response center, or the amygdalas, are looking for danger. Why? Because this is what kept us alive for the last millions of years. A fine tuning towards danger, right? We did not evolve from the chilled out, happy apes. We evolved from the anxious, freaked out apes that saw everything. And so when we're living in our modern world, this is our world. Sometimes we're just reacting. Everybody's had that experience. You're in traffic and somebody slams on the brakes, and our first reaction is a reaction. And so mindfulness and this general self-awareness practice is trying to move us from this animal response to something more of a conscious response. People have a different word for that. You could think of it as the divine part of us. You could think of it as the human spirit. You could think of it as soul. But essentially, we're trying to move our consciousness away from the animal, the mammal, the Homo sapien, to, wow, something more conscious and responsive. And we all know that when we're at our best, when we're like, just think about a day when you were at your best and it didn't matter what was happening around you, like you had more resources to deal with that. So when the kids are screaming, you're like, okay, I'll deal with that. I'll deal with that. And I'll go to the next thing. And then I'll go to the next thing. Versus when we were in reaction mode, we're like an animal. You see our teeth. So life goes so much better. Work goes so much better when you move people from animal to the human spirit.
And I think it's so important to understand our chemistry when we're going through these change periods, because the tendency is to judge, to make proclamations in our own mind. Oh, he's never going to listen. Oh, his intention is not good. They just want to get rid of people because they just want to hoard their own money. I don't know if it's a blessing or not. I like to think it's a blessing, but I happen to be this like naive observer. I was born this way where I think that everybody is innately good.
Yeah, I think so.
And their intentions are almost always towards the good.
Most people.
A lot of people. I'm going to say most people. Most people do want to feel good about what they're doing, but the challenge is that they can't get there from here. Right. And then I think the older we get, if we just keep negating this unconscious mind, we wind up becoming more of that mind and convincing ourselves that we're righteous in this. And a lot of times by the time you've gotten to the C-suite or any kind of an executive level, that's been bred into you, right? So do you have anything, because I find that it's very, you can't go in and say, look, you need to look at, because I do this with my brother all the time. Every time he says something that I feel is biased and negative, I say amygdala, and it drives him crazy. But he listens to me. I sent him a picture of one of your pages last night. Amygdala, look at the amygdala. But he's my brother. It's a joke, but it's working, but it's taking years. You can't walk into your CEO's office and say, you need to change what you're doing because you're looking at this way and your amygdala's in the way. So how do we change work from the inside out? Talk to us about that. How do you do it?
Well, for sure, it's a nuanced conversation, and it's a lot easier when it starts from the top, right? So first of all, each one of us could do this, regardless of our situation. We can change our lives and our work from the inside out. We have that authority over our own world. If you're doing it at the organizational level, then the more senior you can get traction, the better, right? At LinkedIn, our CEO, tells his own journey of not being a conscious leader to moving to be a conscious leader and the amazing power that it had, right? And, we were talking about the meteoric growth of LinkedIn. I asked him one time, I'm like, what do you think the value of you changing to be a conscious leader was, right? Because we had just sold the company to Microsoft for, $27 billion. And he gets us looking, he's like, it's unknowable. Because I never would have gotten here. We never would have gotten here, if I didn't go through that change. So how do we do it? It's one person at a time. It's one heart at a time. Now at LinkedIn, because the one person changed, we were able to change 20,000 people below and create a culture where it's just part of what we do. And now Jeff has moved on. There's a new CEO, but the company is still operating in this very conscious way. So it does have lasting impact if the followers continue on the path. Now, of course, just like everything else, the new CEO could have come in and said, we're not doing that anymore. We're only going to focus on profit. But this is evolution. People come and go and come and go. But on the whole, I do think we're making progress. But one heart at a time.
So when you have a new organization now,
I
right?
do.
That goes in and helps companies do this. So I'm sure that our viewers, and if anybody has any questions, just ring us up on that.
Yeah, throw it in the chat.
Tell
Yeah,
us how you do the thing you do.
sure. Well, I left LinkedIn in September of 21. I wrote the book. And so I started by doing speaking events, and I teach workshops. I teach workshops on things like balancing our ambition with our inner peace, which is a lot of what we're talking about. I do workshops on wellness, things like building resilience. But I wanted something that scales, meaning if I'm not there, how does it continue? Because I have this, I don't know if it's my ego or whatever, but I want to change work from the inside out. And I mean it for 3.5 billion people. And that's not going to happen by me doing speaking gigs. It's going to happen in creating a movement or a scale. So this first thing I built tried to answer the question, okay, if we were to take the 5 or 6 best practices I've ever seen and build the smallest thing possible that would have the biggest impact, what would that look like? And so while mindfulness is an individual sport, compassion is how we work with each other. And what I knew is that for the last 5 or 6 years, I'm building mindfulness programs, but 10% of the organization's interested if I call it that. So now I'm building this thing for high performing teams, right? To build high performing, close knit teams. In other words, nobody's freaked out by this language, right? Everybody wants a high performing team. And essentially using these 6 best practices, this curated best practices, in a way that's easy and helps these teams, install these practices. So the idea is that if a manager and their team can commit 20 minutes every other week for a quarter, that they can make real change. And the change is all about, for the company, it's about engagement. Are people there? Are they really engaged? But at the employee level, this is about connection. Am I connected to my peers? Am I connected to my manager? Am I connected to the mission of the company? And so in the 20 minutes, you get a 5-minute video of me introducing some topic, but then I make it about the team. We integrate it into what they're doing. So I give them a conversation guide. Okay, Scott introduced this topic. Let's make it real for us. And then third, because I spent all those years in operations and I hate waste, how do we make it live? How do we operationalize the thing we talked about? So we do an operational guide too, to make sure that these practices live. And then the practices themselves are super powerful. They start from the easy and go into like the deep, complex things like, how do you get rid of office politics? And there's one 5-minute model where you can get rid of office politics if everybody does the thing. And so we go all the way from connection to mission and vision, connection to each other, set the kind of the ground rules on how we're going to work together as a team, and then go all the way to eliminating politics because we're all in it together. So what we've seen is that it's super powerful when people do it. It's just getting people to commit, 20 minutes every other week for a quarter. Doesn't sound like much, but it's still hard to get groups to actually do it.
Jess, I think we should try it.
Yeah, I'm all in for this. It sounds great.
All right.
Scott, do you find that you get a better response on these types of mindfulness programs if people are working on site together or versus working remotely? Is there any difference there?
Well, I think it's, regardless of this, I think it's powerful when people have connection. One of the things we saw in the beginning is if you have a team of 8 people and you all go home for 2 years and that team of 8 people still is working together, then not that much changed, right? If you're still connecting, you still have this relationship. But what's different is you have a team of 8, 4 of them leave and 5 new ones come on and they've never met each other, which is what we have now. Now it's different, right? Because you're still making these assumptions. It's like, oh, everybody's still connected because the 4 people you're still connected with are, but the 4 or 5 new people, they're not connected or not in the same way for sure. And so the power of what we're doing, we start by building these deeper connections and building in the systems for them to stay connected. And so it's meant to, look, it's for every team, but the sweet spot is for teams that need to like reform. They need to regroup and like come together again.
Interesting. We're fully remote now. We weren't fully remote going into COVID, but during COVID, we hired throughout the country. So now we're in a full-blown remote model. Unfortunately for us, we had the infrastructure to support it. We have the dedication to support it. And one of the things that we have been doing are these water cooler events.
Nice.
And yesterday we had our all hands, and we were saying how we're not getting attendance at the water cooler. And there's nothing worse than going to a water cooler. They're elective, right? So you go to water and you're there and like, is anybody coming? What am I doing here kind of
Right.
thing. But the team wholeheartedly wanted, I think it was pretty, didn't you think, Jess, that everybody's like, yeah, we want to do this. But some of the things in the chat were, can you give us questions to prompt conversation? So, I think the yearning is there.
Right.
In the remote world to have this together feeling. And I've got to say, in my experience, one of the biggest pluses of the remote work balance is that a lot of your garbage doesn't make it, right? I'm not sitting next to you, so I can't see you huffing and puffing because your kid didn't do well in school today, or the aggravation that you're going through. Right. And before you get on that Zoom, you have a minute to breathe.
It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. I find that we often have these really, maybe even especially now, surface level veneer relationships with people, which is ultimately dissatisfying. Because we do our work together, and even if we have a water cooler event, but we all just show up and we just stay at the surface level, then there's still this yearning. And what people want connection. And the way I think about connection is we are like icebergs, right? We show people just little sliver above the waterline. And if you think about how this works, is like, okay, I meet somebody at a party, right? And we're hanging out by the table of food. And at first they're just getting the little sliver. And maybe we talk about our kids or our jobs or whatever. And that's well-worn territory. But then if you think about the people you're deepest friends with, those are the people you've shown more of the iceberg to. Like maybe you've both experienced time, like people from grade school, they've seen a lot of you, or they've experienced the same trauma. You both are survivors of cancer or, something. There's a deeper connection when we show more of ourselves. And so there's this hesitancy from some people to show more of themselves at work because, hey, it's at work. And so this conundrum, what are we going to do? Are we going to live in this safe veneer world, which is unsatisfying? Or are we going to be brave and vulnerable and share a little bit more and find ways to share a little bit more, and it has a little bit more risk to it, but ultimately creates more satisfying relationships when we do?
And it's a contradicted way to work, right? A lot of, questions, a lot of push towards bring your authentic self.
Yeah. But
a lot of reserve of I'm at work.
Yeah.
So why would I do that? And when you were talking about those different layers, I right away went to MEA, to third ball.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Because
go ahead.
When I first went to the Modern Elder Academy, I didn't know what to expect. I actually had a client who said to me, Jeff, you need to go there, just go there. And when she speaks, I just do what she tells me to do. It's one of those things. Then Lorna. And Lorna had been there on sabbatical, but she hadn't been there for the group. Yeah. And I think the power of learning people from that third vault, right? Like from the hi, how are you, to the actual person. And they do this at the MEA in a very short time frame. This is like 7 days, really.
Yeah.
You can learn to surf together. There's all these things you can do, but this connection stays. That first group, it'll be a year in June. That first group, and there's 19 of us out of 22 that still meet every other week, because you can't find that anywhere else.
That's right.
And the crises that the group has come up with, that individuals are facing, and the things that you know about these people.
Right.
And it's not therapy, it's camaraderie.
It's camaraderie. I was just thinking about, when else do we have these types of relationships? You think about people who have been in the military together, and they talk like, these are my brothers. I literally would lay my life on the line for them. It's because you've been in a situation where, you have trust, and it's not about how much money you have or your title or what you look like. It's just, no, you see each other as humans. So one of the practices we do, and this is just here's a freebie, is we call it the 7-minute story. And the idea is that you hold space. So like Christine, if you or I were on the same team and we were going to work together, we would set up a meeting the first time we get together for like a half an hour. And for the first 15 minutes, we would just swap our life story in 7 minutes. And the other person just listens, just holds space to listen. And then maybe when they're done, ask a few questions, and then you change. There's something really powerful about this and you don't have to share anything you don't want to. But what we find is people go deeper. Instead of just listing their resume, they tell you what they're passionate about. They tell you why they did these things. You get some of their core values that we just don't find when we're just having normal conversations. And so this idea of holding space, if you start off your first meeting with that person by going there, then imagine what every other meeting that you have with them will be like, because you've already built this muscle that you can go there. And so maybe next time you go even further and even further and even further. And people say, well, should I really bring my whole self to work? Like, I'm going through this messy whatever. And okay, if nobody really wants to hear about our messy divorce at work, right? But what we can say is, hey guys, I'm going through something that's really hard at home and I'm distracted, and I'll probably be distracted for the next couple of weeks. So if that's what's going on, I just want you to know I'm okay and I appreciate your support, right? It's a way of expressing vulnerability without bringing your whole nightmare, to them. And the people who are really, connected to you will find you out if that's appropriate and go, hey, I'm here for you if you want to talk about it. And then now you have an opening to lower the water even deeper.
Oh, that is really great, because I think that's where the challenge comes in, right? How much of this is me being vulnerable and how much of me is like giving you ugly details that are making us all feel bad, including you,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And learning that stop or that stop
right.
gap. And then I love the fact that you can have a person who can say, look, if you want to talk about that further, you can call me.
Yeah,
that's yeah.
That's right.
It sounds like what you're doing is making it, by giving these guidelines, you're making these conversations safe.
Yeah.
Like, I know the overall is safe, but to have the programming built in
that's right.
to include this safety net.
That's right.
Changes really the way somebody feels about it.
Because you think about, we all look to our manager, right? Probably everybody on this call knows the single biggest factor in how we feel about work is our relationship with our manager. And by the way, the second biggest factor in our overall life satisfaction is how we feel about work. Second only to our mental well-being, right? Which means for many people, the relationship with their manager is actually the most important relationship they have in their whole life to their happiness, to their well-being.
And it can, very often it's an unconscious.
That's right.
Program that you're running. You remember when Bill Clinton was in office and he started wearing yellow ties, which for presidents was unheard of. So it was a big deal. And it was before I opened the company, and I was the only woman exec out of 12. And the president of the company, and I was in charge of training for the organization. We had 450 offices around the country. We had 6,000 employees. We did a lot of traveling, that kind of thing. So he had this yellow tie, and he walked into my office when he's like, I think I'm going to wear this yellow tie. I'm like, oh, you're Bill Clinton. But by the way, right, he's wearing it because the president of the United States is wearing it. So I was doing work on the speed of the leader because we were training managers at the time. And I said, let's just see what happens with this. And there's 12 execs plus me, the only girl, right? And the president, and then these other 9 people. Within 3 weeks, 4 of them had a yellow tie on.
Nice.
So, and
exactly.
When we talk to them later, I'm like, why did you buy? Well, everybody's doing it. I'm like, well, who else do you know wears a yellow tie? They couldn't even state his name. Exactly. And then when I brought his name up, then they were like, oh, and so you could really, we change our hairstyles based on, and the clothes that we wear, and women with arms because of Michelle Obama. I mean, really, we don't understand, because again, it's, it's a unconscious thing, but
This is the power of leadership.
Mhm.
When we're out in the world, we're changing everything around us, right? It's like a drop in the ocean. If you take a swimming pool and take some dye, it's changing around, it's changing around. So whether we're doing good in the world or we're doing bad practices in the world, whatever those two things mean, we're changing people around us.
Yeah, and no matter who you voted for in the last election, there was I call them the Republicans at the gym. Jess has heard this before, right? But I vote for who I like, so I'm not aligned any which way. But there's this group of Republicans at the gym, and every morning they would stand around me at the elliptical and try to get me to give money to the Republican Party. And I would listen to them, have dinner with the Bushes or whatever. And when Trump was running, the Republicans changed their mind. This isn't before the primaries. And I said to him, why are you changing your mind now? Because you're always so dedicated to the party. And these are people that were up there in ages too, right? They're the only people at the gym at 6 o'clock in the morning, or, we're definitely all over 50. And they said to me, and I thought that this really spoke eons, he may be a good leader, but he's not of service. And not that made or break him. Please, I'm not taking a political side here, but what I'm saying is, I think a lot of the frustration was, we have had presidents, when you look at the Clintons and you look at the Bush family, and these are people that were raised to be of service, right? But when you take a self-made entrepreneur or someone who's inherited wealth that has not been of service, and their job is to lead the country, right, we learn that service is separate from good service is different.
Right. And if we think about the lessons we've learned in the last few years of the Great Migration and the talent changes, people want meaning, right? 9 out of 10 people say that they would work for less money to have more meaning in their life. That's another way of saying service. They want their lives to matter. They want their work to matter. And this simple exchange of my time for these dollars is not quite doing it for, the current generation of all of us in the workplace. So there's something really
they're not just
about
thinking that, they're doing it.
Yeah.
So, this gap of 5.8 million people, right? And over 4 million people that have not returned to the workforce. When you look at what they're doing and why they're not coming back, it's because they've been through this trauma and decided it's no longer worth it.
Right.
What was interesting to me, just yesterday, I saw a stat, and I'll circle back about this because I want to double check it, but it's the first time that I've seen a stat that said the bulk of the population now, like over 50% of the population, has polled that they are working for dollars. Right. So now I'm working 2 different jobs, making enough money to replace my old job because my life balance is better, even though I'm working 2 jobs.
Right.
So that's the first time that I've seen that stat. It'll be interesting to track that down and see how that develops.
Right. So some people are treating it like a portfolio, how do I get my happiness? How do I do meaningful work? And maybe what's really meaningful for them is they want to be a poet or a musician or whatever, this thing that doesn't make that much money, or they want to volunteer for hospice, but they still need money. So they drive Uber or they're a chef or whatever. And maybe they view that job, they compartmentalize this job I do just for money. And here's how I get my mind back. In the white collar world, since a lot of these jobs are consuming, we're trying to get it all in one thing. How can we have this one thing be all of it? But maybe that's not the way to look at it. Maybe it is a portfolio of, can I do my photography and my music and my work at the same time and have that be something that gives me deep satisfaction.
And what is the Japanese diagram that you were talking about that brings those 4 together, right? 4 circles.
It's called Ikigai. It's Ikigai, Ikigai. It essentially is a model around purpose or meaning of life. And it's like a Venn diagram of 4 circles. What I love to do, what I'm good at, what the world needs, and what I can get paid for. So what I'm good at, what I love to do, what the world needs, what I can get paid for. And I think this is a really useful model for us to navigate our careers, because even in the same job, the same title, I've moved around in that circle, right? And for some of us, we have jobs where we can shape our jobs in ways, to get closer to the center of the bullseye. So as an example, I always liked people development, but I wasn't in HR. I was in an organization, but I would focus my personal time on hiring the best people and training the best people and making sure that we had programs in place, and then doing coaching for, our high performers in addition to, my own direct staff. So I shaped my job to be more of like an executive coach or a talent developer, even though I was in this, operations job. In the same way, all of us probably can shape our jobs to get closer to the center of that bullseye.
And you had some rare opportunities in there. I'll make a prediction though. I think what we're going to see is, first off, gig workers, contract workers, temp workers, they've known this secret for a long time. I live near the beach and there's a lot of surfers out there that just work in the winter doing whatever they can do. Yeah. These are the guys that come and put my awning up, and they're a plumber, but only in the winter, that kind of thing. Right. So gig working has led the way for that for a long time. And of course, we're seeing that gig economy keep growing. Yeah. But I think that once you're able to step back from the trauma, take that break, look at different positions, and now organizations that will participate in this new movement, which I think they're going to be forced to in many ways, right? Once that the organizations start to catch up with this kind of bring your unique self, that we'll start to see that diagram become more effective, where you can intertwine different things, and it's respected, it's not in opposition of your work. It's actually innate to who you are and therefore part of your work.
That's right.
I think we'll see it come back around.
When we see people leave their corporate job to go be an Uber driver plus a surfer, they're saying, I'm taking back control because I didn't get it in my old place. Mm-hmm. But what I saw at LinkedIn was people filling their bucket with other things at work, right? So we have all these ERGs, whether it's the Blacks or Hispanics or LGBT community, et cetera, or mindfulness. People, if they get to spend 3% or 10 or 20% of their time doing this thing that they're really passionate about, and they feel really deeply that it's helping make the world a better place and it's meaningful for them, for a lot of them, I hear them say, this is why I'm staying. I'm staying because I get the, LinkedIn or company X lets me do this and views it as important. And so that, I think, is a very powerful thing, that if a company really understood, how people are motivated, they would allow for all of that, encourage all of that.
You've got a lot of work to do.
Fact.
We all do. We have a lot of work to do to influence the change that's going to be needed, because we cannot possibly lay off enough people to write what's going on in the economy. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
And I think that, unemployment hasn't been this low in 53 years. And when you go back and so in 1969, when you go back and you look at the economy, then it was still easy to predict, because the reasons for it being there had more to do with what you could do as far as attaining more people. There's no more people to attain.
Yeah.
We aren't making more people in the back room. We have to work with you can't come up with 5 million people.
No.
And then we have other people that we need to retrain. There's some, and I like what Wagner said about moving over to this talent access as compared to talent acquisition. Either way, whatever term you feel comfortable with, we really have to pay attention to what that big picture is, and that really means reimagining.
Yeah,
reimagining how we bring people into our organizations, reimagining how to interface with our people.
That's right.
The world's evolving.
Yeah.
Right.
That's right.
And
that's right.
I think that's a lot of the reason we see our amygdalas kicking in even more, right? Because that's any change is scary. It causes your brain to say, I'm not doing that. We can't do that. Right.
Totally.
So we need to get past that. But any good sci-fi movie will show you we'll get there. We're going to get there.
That's right.
We can already see it happening. Good.
And there's a lot of people doing this good work, right? It's happening. Fits and starts, but it's happening. So we just need to hold on to the gains that we've made in terms of consciousness, in terms of the way that we're treating people. And yeah, there's going to be bumps in the road. There's going to be times when we see leaders doing things that are, counter to what we've seen. And let's not think that that's everybody, right? It's just like the news. When we watch the news, we see some bad thing happening and we think, oh, this is the way the world works. It's like, no, that's not the way the world works, because there's lots of great things happening. There are birthday parties and weddings and, grandmas doing great things and people helping their neighbors. Those things aren't on TV.
Right.
So what we see on TV, what we see in the news is just a tiny sliver of the goodness. And you called it out at the beginning. People are generally good. People are trying to do the right thing.
Well, and I hope we stay this course. We talked in our last webinar too about the Edelman Trust Barometer, and you'll see that People Science, my company, People Science, publishes portions of it. Are you familiar with the Edelman Trust Barometer?
I'm not.
So it's like 23 years now, and Edelman measures, the Trust Barometer measures the world's population's trust in its institutions, 4 separate institutions: government, non-government entities, business, and media.
Yeah.
So if you go back to the Obama administration, the trust in government was exceedingly high, right? 2018 came and the trust in government fell considerably. The trust in media is the lowest level it's ever been recorded.
Yeah.
So there's more people turning off the news.
Yeah.
Right. But what's interesting, this is, and I think, what keeps me up at night is that 5 million jobs. If that isn't spurring you into looking at this, then the number 67%, and it went up 1% from last year. 67% of employees put their the world's population put their trust in business and CEOs.
Yeah.
Did you ever think you'd hear that? Think about that.
Right.
In their CEOs. And they expect those CEOs to get behind their causes.
Yeah.
Whatever those causes are. Yeah. There's an incredible amount of power.
That's right.
Right now in the C-suite.
That's right.
So if we can take advantage of those two things, we can have a tremendous shift.
That's right.
Maybe not as much of a shift as we saw with the pandemic, but if we can proactively embrace this and really capitalize on where we are, we can move our whole economy in a different direction very quickly.
Oh, and we can move consciousness. So to your point, companies, organizations have more power than they've ever had. They have more power than government or religion in terms of shaping consciousness. Think about that. More power than government or religion in shaping consciousness. So as an example, if you start at a big company like Microsoft or LinkedIn or Google or whatever, you have to fit into the company culture. Like, it's just part of the deal. You have to fit in. And so if the company culture is amazing and it's this place where we're trying to do good work, then you're going to rise to that amazement. If it's just transactional and it's just like dehumanistic and we're all about a dollar, then you'll probably operate just like that. I was having a conversation with a friend at LinkedIn. We kind of risen through the ranks together. And now he's a extremely senior person at LinkedIn. And he had come from a different industry, like the consulting industry, one of the big ones that's kind of, a harsh type of environment. And I asked him what he thought of the LinkedIn culture and how he was feeling about it and how he was operating in it and what his old world was like. And he said he wasn't too proud of it, but he found that he was kind of malleable, meaning that in his old world, he acted like everybody else. But when he got to LinkedIn and he saw that he could be a good person and be successful, he doubled down on that. And then it was amazing for him. And now he never wanted to go back to a different kind of environment. But given the permission, given the environment, creating a leadership team where it's normal and required to be both a good person and a good leader changes everything. And so this is where I hope we get to. I hope that we get to imagine a world where shareholders are taking action against C-suites that aren't taking care of their employees. That's where I want to get to, where shareholders say, we know that over the long term, if you create a great environment for your employees, we as shareholders will benefit.
That's an interesting perspective. There was a call out, I think it was the Washington Post talking about SVB Bank. And I can't believe this reporter said this. But what he said is, I'm not saying 12 white guys on the board would have done a different job. Did you see this?
I did. I can't believe
Dude,
he uttered that out loud.
I can't believe the Post did not come out with some kind of comment
Right.
about that. And it's kind of buried. I mean, if I was the Times, I think I'd kind of call the Post out, right? And I didn't see that happen. It was interesting. But I think what we need to learn too along the way, and we learn this all the time, right, Jess? We can give you story after story where we sit down and we meet with an organization and we're like, oh my God, I don't want to work here. But I've learned a long time ago that there is a job for every person and a person for every job. So not everybody can work in a LinkedIn environment and be effective.
That's
right.
true.
If we have clients that are carrot and stick, or we have large organizations that are much more attuned to consciousness, but have this one-off department and they don't want to lose this fella, and they've done extremely well. The department's done well, but it's a carrot and stick environment. And the only people who do well there are carrot and stick people. And that's okay because, well, for us, it's a challenge, but we find carrot and stick people who can only perform in carrot and stick. So really understanding authentically who you are as an organization. I will take that a step further and say, though, we are evolving. Consciousness is becoming so much more popular. And as workers are changing their mind in the workforce, new workers are already coming in with this stereo built in, right? They're vibrating at a level that's different. They want mental health. They want to feel good where they are. Yeah. So as those numbers grow, but I think we do need to be mindful of the others in the workforce who aren't there yet and understand that we're all in this together.
That's right.
Cool.
Beautiful.
Is that a question we have in there, Jess?
Yeah, someone asked if they can get a recording of this webinar. So I think we will be sending that out shortly after.
We don't always share the recordings, but this one we will definitely, because changing the world, right? Absolutely. In fact, anybody on this webinar, Scott's going to send a hoodie to anybody on this webinar.
Is that right?
No, I made that up. But it would be interesting to hear if you apply any of these things. The book is, by the way, the book does not talk about step for step how to implement this into your work life. This is a quick read. I think I read this, the first 70 pages I read in less than 2 hours. And thank you for being so vulnerable, Scott, because this is the first time that I've met a business exec who really comes from their heart and share that in paper and really talks about being vulnerable, which really helped me last night even when I was looking at it. So, great book.
The book, The Full Body, yes. It's intended to be a fire starter. And then the changing work thing that I'm building is tended to be the how-to. Like, okay, here's how you implement.
But happens from inside. Starts with your own full body, yes.
That's right.
It goes from there. Scott, I love our conversations.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being on. We'll circulate the webinar and maybe we'll do a follow-up. Let's see how that works out. And we will be in touch to have you help us out here at People Science.
Love it. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Scott.
As always, Jess, thank you. And we'll see everyone soon.
Bye.
Bye now.